So good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this edition of QB Talks, QBO closing the books at year end. My name is Gary DeHart. I'm the publisher of Insightful Accountant, and I would like to say thank you to our presenter, Liz Scott. Hey, Liz, thank you. And so send her fudge. We know that she likes fudge. So thanks for sharing your insights with us today. I'm going to let Liz just give you her own bio. It's ever evolving. She does so many different things. So I'd hate to say it because I'd probably get it wrong with all the things she does. So, but excuse me, we certainly want to say thank you to our sponsor, Rewind. So Rewind Backups protects the critical data which runs your and your clients' businesses. So online accounting software products, as you know, don't automatically save your transactions and files. So if they're deleted, Rewind Backups is the undo button for your online accounting software, automatically saving and restoring the latest version of your books. Rewind Backups are available for QuickBooks Online, Shopify, Shopify Plus, GitHub, Trello, Microsoft 365, and BigCommerce, with a dozen other platforms currently in beta, and I'm sure there's others that have actually been released since this was written. A couple of housekeeping items. There is no CPE for this. We probably need to be offering those for next year. So if you think we should be offering CPE for QB Talks, just put that in the chat so I can so we can know whether we need to add that in 2023. So if you do have any questions, please put them in the questions panel, and because I think chat's disabled, but put your questions in the questions panel. We'll put a link to the recording to this of this session on our YouTube channel. I will put that link also in the chat, and we'll also put the slide deck in the chat for you as well. All of these things will also be sent to you in the follow-up, which you will receive sometime tomorrow, if not even this evening. So lastly, I did want to mention, and I think Liz will probably reference this a couple of times too, we did kick off our 2023 Top 100 Pro Advisor program today. So make sure you go out and nominate yourself, nominate others who you think are qualified to be in that top 100. So Liz, as I was talking, I forgot to do my poll question for Rewind. So let me throw that up there before I turn this over. And it's a 4-part question. So just run through those, answer those real quickly, and then we'll let Liz dive in and wow us with closing the year.
You know, there was a question that came in. It was asking about the difference between Rewind and ChronoBooks. And so my answer over in the Q&A was that, you know, ChronoBooks was purchased, it was acquired by QuickBooks. And so that's what's available in QuickBooks Online Advanced. But if you want to be able to back up your QuickBooks file, Rewind is the one that's available for everyone. So it doesn't matter which subscription level that you're in. And they do more than just the QuickBooks Online backups.
Yeah, everybody that I've ever spoken with that uses Rewind, or when it's come up and they have clients on or what have you, as everyone I've ever spoken to has spoken very highly of it. I'm not saying that because they're a sponsor, saying that because that's just true, real feedback that I've received from the community. So, all right, we'll leave this open for about 5 more seconds. So if you could go ahead and respond through that. It's not CPE required, so you don't have to. And we will, if you're looking for information, we'll send your name on to Rewind. So we're going to close this out in about 3 more seconds and let Liz do her thing. All right, Liz, it's all yours. Thank you.
All right, well, I will take it away then. So like Gary was saying, my bio does change. I think that that's one of my favorite things about being in my position. And the exciting thing about this upcoming year is many of you know that I've been focused on my apps relationship. And the role that I have taken on is really the voice to be able to listen to all of my community feedback from my accounting and bookkeeping peers, and then take that to developers. That has become my full-time job. So whenever I'm thinking about apps, I'm really thinking about my community. So I would love to hear feedback. I love to hear your thoughts. I think it's really important to be able to have, you know, somebody who's in this role to be able to be this liaison going back and forth. So I'm honored to have this position, and I definitely cherish our community. And so that's why I've dedicated my time to being this person to be able to help build those solutions and voice those opinions to those developers. Today, we're going to be talking about payroll. We're going to be talking about accounting and closing the books. So many of you have done this 1,000 times over. You're in year end and going through the motions is one of those that we're gearing up towards. So this webinar is all about kind of refreshing some of the processes that you've done in the past, pulling in those checklists. Oh yeah, what is it that you had checked before? What are some of those steps that you had done before? Those are activities that once you do it a couple of times in the new year, whenever you're closing the books, it becomes systematic. But getting geared up for that system, or maybe even making tweaks to those systems, is really important to get yourself ready. So full blown momentum. We're going to go through what are some of the steps that I do whenever I'm going through year end. I also want to include payroll in part of the year end conversation. And then ultimately we'll end on some of the year end forms and documents that are necessary. And then look at prep for tax. I realize that not everybody here is a tax accountant, so I just want to highlight what's available so that way everybody's seeing the new things and just kind of aware of what's available all inside of QuickBooks. I see over in chat that Gary has posted the top 100 link. Oh, thank you, Gary. This is definitely the time of year to get that done. Let me move over, and I'm going to start with the period end close. And when I'm thinking about period end close, that's really any time that you're ending a time frame. So, there's some of us who are doing month-end closing. There's some of us that are doing, quarterly reviews. But these are the steps that really are part of the year-end checklist, which can be also perform some of these during the month and quarterly activities. So making sure that the first month of your financial year. I only have a few clients that have a different fiscal year than the normal calendar year, but I do go through and I open up my accounting toolbox that's inside of QuickBooks Online Accountant, and I check to make sure that whenever I'm pulling reports, that I'm not pulling a calendar year, that I'm actually paying attention to what their fiscal year is. And then looking at the customer balances and sending statements. Part of what we're going to work through is looking at how do you write off. There's several different correct ways to write off, but inside of QuickBooks, if you decide to use the write off tool, just know that it's going to post the write-off to that original date of that transaction. Where some of you are kind of like me, I really prefer to create a credit memo, and my account that I'm going to use is my write-off, and then I'm going to use that credit to then post against that transaction that's opened. The outstanding deposits, gosh, I can't tell you how many times I have people who will say, I've reconciled, and then I go in and I look at outstanding transactions, which includes sometimes deposits. And there's this big long list. Not all the time does, the office manager or an owner understand what all is included in reconciling. And I can even say that sometimes I've seen it inside of bookkeeping and accounting firms that you might have a team member that saves the hard stuff for last, and then never actually comes back through and sweeps out all of those outstanding transactions. So that is a major part of closing out the books, that you are going to have those numbers carry on into the tax return. So it is really important to make sure that outstanding transactions, whenever you're going to reconcile, are closed out. However it is that they need to properly be closed out. Or if they truly are outstanding, there's going to be those times whenever you have a check that's not going to clear until the next year. That's going to be completely correct and acceptable. It's just more of if a check is hanging out and it's been hanging out for 6 months, really it's time to determine what do you need to do with it. Running reports, we're going to go through what kind of reports do I run? What do I look for whenever I'm going through the reports at year end? And then, any distributions that need to be established, that's part of the year-end process. I also want to make sure this is the time of year. I would even say, don't even wait till next week. But this is the time of year, especially those of you who are in QuickBooks Online payroll, that I go to my clients and I ask them, are there any bonuses that you want to issue? It's really too late whenever we go to January 1 to be able to issue those bonuses. If you're in QuickBooks Online payroll, you cannot backdate those postings for payroll. So I reach out and I ask now, do we need to determine what kind of bonuses or commissions that you would like to give to your employees, yourself, and make sure that happens before year-end close. The reclassify transactions, part of what we're going to do is we're going to go through the books review, and I'll show you some of the things that I use inside of the reclassify inside of your books. So why close the books? This is all about being able to make sure that you have reliable information. And the year activities that take place, I would say, if you don't already, I would take these notes and I would start to say, here's my checklist. I would send a checklist out to each of your clients and I would ask them, do they have any new loans? Have they sold any vehicles? Did they purchase any pieces of equipment that you don't know about? There are sometimes whenever I'll find it's a $2,500 check that maybe my client has written, but they didn't tell me what that $2,500 check was for. And so I want to go back to my client and ask them, what did you buy? And sometimes I get surprised and they're like, well, I found this, really cheap truck, and so it's an asset. We need to be able to record it. So those kinds of things, or trailers. So I do ask, and I do have a series of regular items that I ask my clients. Did you pay off any loans? Did you get any brand new credit cards that you haven't told us? So those are really standard questions that I ask my clients, and I make sure to go through each of those. And then I'm also thinking about verifying the balances. So whenever I'm talking about gathering documents, I'm also including loans. There's also some clients that instead of parking the interest and the principal and splitting it monthly, it happens annually. And so I need to be able to have statements in order to look at those loans and know which parts were truly paid to principal and which parts are really actually interest. The making adjustments, that's part of that year-end close, and then setting the closing date. I'm not one that closes a period every single month and puts in a closing date, but I do actually go through my clients and I do put in a closing date for year-end. After we finalize the books, after we have finished going through and pulling our reports and doing all necessary journal entries and documentation of loan interest, I go in and I set a closing date. Some of you out there set passwords, and some of them are really clever. I think that Michelle Long, I think her closing date password is $100 an hour or something like that. So that way she's letting the client know that if they go and mess something up, that's going to be their rate that they're going to be paying her in order to go back in and fix things. So you can come up with all different kinds of closing date passwords if you're someone who wants to put a password in. I just put in the warning because I want them to know that the books have been closed. They did actually pay us to do that step. And so please don't go and delete or change things. And the other things that we do, if you're someone who likes to have month-end conversations with your clients, this is a really, really good time to make sure that you're doing that. If you're somebody who you've got clients that don't regularly show up to meetings, I know that there's some that we have that they're very, very happy to not ever actually have a conversation, although I really like to have those conversations. I think that it does make it the most valuable relationship for both parties. But it is my chance at year end to have that human connection. It's my chance to be able to ask them, how are they doing? How's their life? They are engaging with us monthly. We are actually working, even though silently, for them on an ongoing basis. It's nice to be able to catch up with the human instead of just always staying strictly focused on the business. And the documents, I mean, this is one of those that resource documents are so hypercritical. I know that years ago we used to have HubDoc, and most of us really took advantage of being able to have HubDoc because it would go out and it would fetch the statements for us. And it wouldn't just have to be bank or credit card, it could also be bills. I know that some of us have moved over to LedgerSync, and LedgerSync has got some of the same capabilities. So what I'm able to do is put into LedgerSync the username and password, and it will fetch for us. There are some conditions around what kind of statements that it can fetch, but if you opt into also having the images pulled, you can also have images that are gathered. And then you can even map where documents are stored, so that way you can auto store those documents. This time is great for a poll, Gary, if you don't mind launching our next poll, and that way we can get our poll going. Thank you very much. So which type of transactions should you use to reduce the amount owed to a vendor? And this is just really, there's no actual tally being captured here, but just really asking the difference between credit memo and vendor credit. And then journal entry. Of course, there's some who might take advantage of that too. Gary, I'm going to go ahead and let you count down our poll since you know the
All right.
percentage.
And then, hey, while we wrap this up, I do not have a copy of the slide deck, so if you could drop that in the chat.
You
Great.
got it. I think I'll probably do it at the end because I'll stop sharing
Okay.
screen at the end.
Okay, thanks. All right, we're going to close this out in about 3 more seconds here. 3, 2, and 1.
Awesome. So vendor credit would be what you would want to create, and then that vendor credit is going to reduce the amount that it's owed to a vendor. Credit memo would really be more used for a customer, and to be able to, either there's a credit that has been issued, and you're going to, in the case that I was sharing earlier, I use credit memos in order to, I use the account posting write-off, and then I can apply my write-off credit memo to an open invoice. Oh, books review. So books review inside of QuickBooks Online continues to get better and better. One of the things that we are getting access to is this is an internal workflow that's being utilized by some of the QuickBooks Live teams. So whenever we look at what are they actually using, what's the software and the tools, you're seeing it. So that's kind of a nice little tidbit to know whenever you're going through and you're using book review. This is the workflow, this is the tool that is being used internally at QuickBooks Live. So if you come over into the books review section inside of QuickBooks, you can see that you can have this new area that's called setup. I'm actually going to go ahead and go live because I think that it's always fun to share with you the actual activities. And so you should see my QuickBooks screen now. And I apologize, I'm going to be looking over at my other monitor for a little bit. But do you see my screen? You should be able to see my QuickBooks that's up.
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right, fantastic. All right, so setup is something that's new. Setup didn't exist prior to this year. And what setup allows you to do is to come through here and to look at opening balances, for example. So maybe you've got a client and you're going through and you're looking at all of the open balances and you're saying, oh my gosh, there's no way that they have that much inside of their petty cash. You can actually say what the actual balance should be, and then you can make that posting adjustment. And now you're going to also want to post, where do you want this to go? And because it's always a where would you like to post it? We have a drop down now that allows you to post to a particular drop down. Do you want it to go to open balance equity? I'm going to shove it there right now because that's the best place for this moment. But you can see that you have access to your chart of accounts, and I can make that posting adjustment. And what's going to happen with that posting adjustment is I now have a transaction that has been auto-created that's going to tell me what was it that I adjusted, and I wanted to create a balance that was actually 0 for my petty cash. And then if I ever wanted to come back in, I could actually come back to my 0 and I could make any type of necessary changes. I can also see statuses of other accounts. Another area is being able to look at all the connected apps. So I can see all of the apps that are connected to this particular QuickBooks file. One area that I go into quite often is this transaction review screen. And from this transaction review screen, one of the places that I go to is looking at transactions without payee. And oftentimes people are unaware that you can actually come through here and in bulk, you can add a payee. So if you have got a memo line that tells you what was the vendor, then you can actually come over and you can add that payee straight from the books review. So I never have to actually go into the transaction. One little tip that I want to share is you can see the difference here. Whenever I'm looking at my list, I have some transactions with a memo and some that do not. The way to get that memo to come in is inside of your bank feeds. So if I go over into my bank feeds, into this demo checking account, and into this little small gear icon, and I scroll to copy bank details to memo, by turning that on, I can come over into a transaction now, and whatever the bank details are now copied over into that memo line. And that memo line is what we were actually able to see in our books review in this transactions area right here. So if I did not have that little check mark next to copy the memo line, I would not have this memo line visible for me to easily identify which vendor should I categorize. So it's kind of a nice little tip there. You can do undeposited funds, so I actually can apply payments. So that's another option. If I have, it just, sometimes it happens that you have a invoice and you have a payment, but they've never been synced together. You can do that inside of this transaction review screen. The account reconciliation. This is part of the month end, quarter end, and year end process. Reconciling, we're all very familiar with. But I can come over and I can look to see what's the status of my reconciliations. This is really important because I can come over and I can actually open up what was that last reconciliation. I can see the history. That's going to give you some indication as to how much work is going to be done. This is my demo file, so I never reconcile it. And if you get a client that comes to you who's like this, you can actually determine, do you actually have time to deal with a client that might have this kind of mess that would need to be cleaned up? I can see my outstanding transactions. Again, this is part of making sure that the books are in good shape for being able to identify, do you have good balances? And bank balances are not correct if you've got all of these outstanding transactions that really either are duplicates, and sometimes I find that, or they're posted to the wrong account, and then they end up resulting in a duplicate. Typically, it's an expense duplicate that I see. Like if there's a credit card that somebody should have posted a transaction to, but they in error posted to a checking account. These are the kinds of things that we come through and look to identify at month end. And then finally, you can come over here and you can do your final review, and then you can also do wrap up. So wrap up and setup are new to this year, and you can go through and you can create some reports, you can create some report packages. So there's a lot that's available inside of the books review area. I'm going to go ahead and minimize QuickBooks. And inside of this, the slide deck that you're going to get, you're going to see all of these slides that are going to talk you through the various areas that I was demoing live to make sure that you've got each of these different areas. So adding the payee, recording those deposits. And you can create different task items if you want to be able to add inside of your review or inside of your account reconciliation. Anytime that you have an additional task that you want to create, you can actually add those tasks to become part of your books review process. You know, one of the things that I'm always looking for is, do my ending balances match? So this is an important step. If you are someone who is storing your bank statement inside of QuickBooks, this is really easy for, and maybe if you have two different team members, you've got somebody who's working on the books and you've got somebody else who might come back and review. This is a really important step to make sure that you've always got ending balances that are correct. Inside of the reports area, this is where I start to identify what should I be looking at whenever I'm pulling a balance sheet. So at year end, and whenever I pull the balance sheet, these are the kinds of areas that I'm identifying. I want to be able to look at my different account types, and then what am I wanting to see on those reports? I want to see my, I'll pull maybe an AR aging summary and then also an open invoices report, look at the two. Sometimes whenever I'm thinking about accounts receivable, I really like our new, it's not new this year, but it was new last year. I really like our report that is invoices and payments. So I was using it just yesterday for a client that had payments that were mapped to the wrong invoices. So for example, the February invoice was being mapped to a payment that happened in September and vice versa. So I was able to pull that invoices and payments report so I could see, here is my invoice and here's the associated payment and the dates line up. So that's a really good report. Those of you who are doing inventory, it's really important to do a physical inventory count. And there is a worksheet that you can download from QuickBooks, and you can turn that into a checklist for your client to go through and say, do you even have this on stock anymore? Do we need to change the quantity on hand? And then they submit that back to you, and then you're able to go through and make those adjustments to inventory. Looking for undeposited funds. So the transaction detail report, you can actually filter and you can see just the unclear transactions. That's another way to identify any type of outstanding transactions. So if I'm looking at really most reports, you can add a column for the type of transactions, and then you can even look at the filter down to identify the uncleared transactions. Some other things that I'm looking at, just like we were talking about the AR report that has the invoice and the payments, that is true for bills as well. So if you are working with a client that has bills, the bills and bill payment report is super handy to identify, did your client have a group of bills that they paid with one payment? You can actually see them grouped together, the bills with the associated payments. That's one of my favorite reports as well. And then I come back in and I look at what's outstanding. So again, this is part of my checklist that I use as I'm going through, and I look at each of these areas. To sales tax, did I make sure that any necessary sales tax adjustments have been made? Payroll taxes, that's another one that it seems like every single year that there's some adjustments that need to be made for payroll taxes. And I'll kind of show you some of my reports that I use whenever I'm looking at payroll tax balances here in a second. I also go over to the profit and loss, and I do start with my balance sheet, and that's where I begin my review journey. And I don't even really pay attention to my P&L until I have a balance sheet that I trust. And then I come over and I open up my profit and loss and I start to review the various accounts. So I think of the balance sheet as being my place that I'm going to have the most possible issues. And then I come over to the P&L and it's like, these are the little tidying. This is the little small grouping. Or if you are a bookkeeper and in the profit and loss, this is the place that you are reviewing, then the types of areas that you're going to want to review are income. So do you have different income streams, and have the various customers been mapped to the correct income streams? So do the products and services align with the account that's being chosen? That's another area that every year I'll go over to my products and services. I actually will sort my columns in my products and services, and I will make sure that the income account or the expense account that I'm anticipating is mapped correctly. So oftentimes at year end, whenever I'm looking at reports and I'm not understanding why there's these invoices or products and services that are showing up in strange places, inside of the product mapping is where I go and identify, is there a bit of a cleanup that needs to happen? And then also, of course, the interest. So I'm looking at any type of loan schedule, loan folio, to be able to make sure that all interest is being documented. Depreciation, I would say, if your role is not to deal with depreciation, then oftentimes if you have a tax accountant who comes in later, I would make sure that they have access to the QuickBooks Online files, so that way they can post those adjustments for you. Part of creating journal entries is making year-end adjustments. I know that there are several out there who do workarounds for moving away from journal entries, and that's just fine. So if you would prefer to create an expense transaction or a bill in order to, with the bill, type in all of your different various balances, that's an option that many choose to use. I think that Debbie Kilsheimer, that's one of the things that she does, is she'll use a bill to be able to park all of the balances of her various accounts, and it's a $0 bill. So if there was any type of posting to an expense transaction or a balance sheet account, then she's going to back enter in the details with a bill instead of using a journal entry. But journal entries are very common whenever you're thinking about year-end adjustments. What we want to stay away from whenever we talk about reducing the amount of journal entries that are entered into QuickBooks, it's really using them on a daily basis. QuickBooks is not designed for journal entries. QuickBooks is designed for transactions, and journal entries are just not considered a normal transaction. They're considered typically its own kind of posting, and therefore it's used more for the year-end or account balance adjustments. Other areas to go and look at. So if I'm thinking about entering in a vendor credit, I'm thinking about adjusting the amount that's owed to a vendor. I can think right now, I'm sure you can too. I've got two clients that are popping up in my head. Whenever I go and I look at the vendor balance, oh my gosh, I know that it's always wrong. One of the things that I have is one of my clients, they will enter in their bills properly all month long, sometimes all quarter, and then it comes to making that payment. And what they do is they'll create an expense transaction, and that's how they paid off their balance with that vendor. And so if you're somebody who has a client that's like that, one easy fix is to go into the expense transaction and actually change it to accounts payable. And then you can go into the bill and you can actually apply that payment that was recorded in that initial expense transaction. You can apply that payment to all of those open bills. So that's one way to do it. Vendor credits, sometimes I'll come back to my client and I'll say, there's just $2 and real world scenario last night. It's $2.50 that's still due. And they're like, no, they wrote that off. So being able to go in and make an adjustment that that vendor has allowed that customer to say that they have a $0 balance. So those are the kinds of things that I look at whenever I'm going through my year end. I would have pulled in that scenario a open bill report, and that's how I was able to identify this $2.50. Being able to look at your trial balance, oftentimes this is your work paper. And then ultimately, once I've gone through all of these activities, I close the books. So there's a couple of different ways to access close the books. This is where I was talking about, you can set in that password, you can make it as clever as you want to, or you can be somebody like myself that I'll put a closing date and then all I have is a warning that pops up. So that way the client can proceed. And the reason that I do that is there are times whenever I'm unavailable and my client needs to be able to post a transaction, and I don't want their progress moving forward to be based off of my availability. So that's one of the reasons why I don't put in a password. If you're wondering why, I don't think it's fair to hold them up whenever it's me. So year-end activities for payroll. So the year-end starts with identifying some of the tasks that need to be done. I like to think about the employee as part of my checklist. So each of the employees, one of the things we do is run a employee details report. And on that employee details report, we'll omit the column that has the Social Security numbers. And then we can send that over to our client to say, can you please verify, did anybody get married? Did an employee's address change? And almost inevitably, we have somebody who, if they've got 5 or more employees, somebody's moved. And that's how we're able to identify it, is at year end, because most of the time the employer doesn't think about notifying us. So we go through and we look at it, and it's typically the address is where we find a lot of the different changes. This is just a nice checklist that I threw in here, so that way you can have what all should you be looking at whenever you're thinking about payroll. The other things that I'm looking at whenever I'm going through year end is I'm looking at, has any of the payroll responsibilities changed? So does everybody still have the same job moving forward? Did something not work in the existing year and you want to make a change moving forward? It is okay for you as the person who is helping the client to say, it really didn't work for me to wait on such and such manager to approve all of the time. They didn't get to it in a timely manner. So I want to maybe change that role in our agreement. Or maybe you determine, I no longer want to be the one who's entering the time because the manager didn't get it to me in a timely manner. And so I no longer want to be responsible for late payrolls. So those are the kinds of things that I start to evaluate at year end, because that's going to affect, do you want to change an engagement moving forward? Oftentimes people are doing different engagement letters for the new year. So, it's time to kind of think about what worked and what didn't work. Running reports after processing payroll. So I obviously have a couple of favorite reports, and some of the go-tos are always going to be the payroll tax liability. That's how I'm going to be able to determine what has been paid, what is owed. So that's a really important report. Total payroll cost, I think that one's often what I find is my clients are confused about the total cost of payroll. They see the wages and that they know that there's taxes, but they don't quite get the sum of the dollars that are spent. So that's a good report whenever you're talking to your clients at year end. And you want to have something to go over. I was saying some of those clients you don't always get to meet with and to work with. And so what would be important to them? Payroll is one of the most expensive areas inside of a business. So anytime that you can bring them data, I think that that's a huge win for your clients. I also go through the retirement plans. If I've got clients that are using any type of retirement benefits that are being issued. I want to understand, is it recorded in QuickBooks? Are they doing it outside of QuickBooks? I want to make sure that payroll matches. And then I have 3 reports that are my go-to reports that are very, very similar that I just want to highlight here. So the 3 reports that are very similar are the payroll summary by employee report, the payroll summary, and the payroll details. So these 3 reports, I want to go over just a little bit so you can see what some of the differences are. Payroll summary by employee, you've got your gross and your adjusted wages, but it's totaled by an employee or a period. So that's one of the differences here. You can customize by deciding, do you want to see columns or rows, but it's going to be grouped by employee or period. The payroll summary report, this is going to be ordered by paychecks. So if you pull a report and you have way long list and too much data, you may not want to have the payroll summary report. Maybe this is not going to be the type of grouping that you want to see. Sometimes the payroll details report is going to be the breakdown that is going to be most helpful whenever you're wanting to see the total gross of wages or the net. So these are my 3 go-to reports. It really depends on what type of information I'm trying to gather. But if I want to summarize and I don't want it to see a per paycheck basis, then I'm not going to choose what, I would think by name, payroll summary would be the report that you would want to go to. But really, whenever you start to look at it, it's by paycheck. So you end up getting pages and pages and pages of lists of paychecks, and it doesn't really help you group by employee. So those are kind of some little areas that kind of help when gathering reports. The report that's available that not everybody is aware of and not everybody uses is the workers' compensation report. So even if you are not somebody who is using workers' comp that's powered by or I won't really say powered by, but that has an association with QuickBooks, even if you don't use a workers' comp that is associated, you can still come over and you can put in workers' comp class codes by employee. So you can pull that workers' comp report and you can actually sort the data. So if you wanted to pull in for a certain custom date range, most time the audits, the dates, are very random. And if you pull in the date range that you want to review, then you can actually click into that hyperlink where you can see the wages paid for that particular workers' comp class code. And then you could even see the individual employees that were paid in that code. I think this is going to be a great time for a poll. So Gary, if you can launch the poll, and while you're doing that, I think that I will stop share for just a second so that way I can go and grab the PDF. And make sure that everybody has access to the PDF.
All right, we'll leave that open for about 5 more seconds and then we'll go ahead and close it out. So if you want to participate, please do. 3, 2, and 1. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. I think that it's going to take me just a minute to get that document shared. So I think what I'll do, Gary, is at the very end, I will get that posted because it's my options to upload inside of our Zoom area is not happy with me. All right. So most of you answered that as the payroll summary report. And I agree, the trick part there was the individual employee paychecks. So being able to see individual employee paychecks is what we were after. So let me come back over here, and you should be seeing my presentation screen again. And we're going to move over into reconciling payroll. When I'm starting the reconciliation of payroll process, there are several accounts that I want to review. So I'm looking at paid time off, any type of bonuses. Again, this is whenever I go over to my clients and ask, are you going to be issuing any bonuses at year end or any type of payroll adjustments that need to be made? And so that's, the time to be able to do it. Any type of benefits. Whenever I'm looking at other deductions, I'm looking at garnishments. Do the garnishment contributions make sense? The garnishment payments make sense. So when I pull up my balance sheet, these are the areas that I'm looking at whenever it's related to payroll. I'm going through and I'm looking at any type of negative balances. Why might I have a negative balance? It truly might be that there was an overpayment, that maybe too much was paid to a particular payroll liability. Or what sometimes you end up finding is that you've got a negative balance because your client or somebody on the team has posted penalties and interest to the actual liability account, resulting in this what looks like an overpayment. So going through and pulling your report and drilling down into each of those payroll liabilities to look at what are the amount of dollars that have gone out. Do they actually make sense? Where some of those penalties and interest, do they actually belong on your P&L? So I'm verifying on the profit and loss. I'm going through and I'm looking at the wages. I am looking at other types of payroll expenses, what else has happened. And, even looking at health insurance and the retirement plans, oftentimes what I see is that a liability account, it has been omitted. So maybe the liability is being posted because the paycheck is being created, but whenever it comes time to actually pay for the 401k or for the health benefits, those times the check is being written and it's being posted directly to a P&L expense account. So I do go through and I make sure that, again, my balances make sense. And those are oftentimes where I see the most problems. And what I do is I start with my employee details. So I pull that up and I look to make sure who all, first of all, should have any type of paid time off. Who has balances that are due? I even check with my clients and I ask them, as part of that verifying the address, who should have any type of balances or roll over paid time off that's going to carry on with them? Or does everybody start from zero? So it's like a use or lose. But those are the kinds of questions that I'm asking my clients about payroll during this time of year. And I start now, so that way on January 1, it's not too late. And then this is a example of being able to pull up that payroll tax liability report that I was telling you I really like. So you can find this over in your report center, the payroll tax liability report, and it's going to tell you the total amount of taxes, what was paid, and what is still owed. And then you can take that what's still owed balance, you can pull up your balance sheet and you can look at your balance sheet accounts and you can see, does the what's owed match your balance sheet? And if it doesn't, why? Do you have more liabilities? Do you have expenses that need to be pulled out? But this is a way to start identifying, do you have some wonky balances? The other thing that you can do is you can go into the taxes center of your QuickBooks file and then go over to payroll taxes, and you can look at what is owed there. So what is your balance? These numbers should tie into each other as long as you are looking at your balance sheet like right after you've made some payroll payments. That's when it'd be the easiest to look at those balances. W-2 forms and year end. This is going to be at the time of year where we hear from our employees a lot. So they want to know, is my W-2 ready? And those employees really start to ask the employers. And so I try to be proactive in making sure that I know the deadlines when our W-2 is going to be available. And, I also want to make sure that all things that were related to questions about the employees have already been asked. And that way it doesn't slow down this year-end phase, because this is the step where I feel like I get the most questions at year-end. And if we're proactive, I get less of the panic, and I get more of a, oh, we understand, and they tell their employees that they know where we're at in the process. But if you are somebody who has taxes and forms turned on, then you are actually going to have W-2 sent directly through the mail to your employees. If you are somebody who also has all of the employees that are in workforce, or those employees who are in workforce, they're going to be able to automatically go into workforce, and that is their employee portal for all pay stubs and including W-2s. So they can download those as soon as they are available inside of workforce. So if you haven't yet already made sure that all employees have been invited to workforce, this is the time of year to start going through. Include that in your checklist as you're going through. This is how you can get over to those submissions of payroll forms. You're going to go over into your taxes area, and then you can look at your forms, and you can filter down into which forms are you wanting to identify. And then whenever we're talking about preparing for W-2s, this is just kind of like a little cheat sheet of where do the different copies go. And then this is your important dates. Dates are subject to change every single year with QuickBooks. So this is the latest information. So on January 8th, if you have automated taxes and forms turned on, then QuickBooks Online Payroll is going to start preparing those W-2s. By January 10th, those W-2s are going to be available inside of Workforce for those employees who do have Workforce turned on, that they've signed into their account. By January 20th, this is whenever you can start filing the W-2s and getting confirmations. And then on January 27th, this is going to be the deadline to submit inside of QuickBooks prior to being late for the January 31st deadline. So if you are somebody who is going to be a button pusher, you do not have automated taxes and forms turned on, then your deadline for submission is January 27th, in order to make sure that the system doesn't overload with all of the different submissions that are coming in from all of the various clients. So January 27th is the deadline for making that January 31st. Here's how you can access your W-2s. If you need to go in and maybe just get a PDF copy of all of them. I know some people will grab all the PDFs for their clients, and then they'll send them over inside of a link, and then the employer can print them. One thing you could do is just, again, hop on a call with your client, and you could walk them through, so that way you're not electronically sending any information back and forth. Or you could even send them the screenshots of this. You can take it and you can say, here's where you go and you can find these forms by yourself. And then you can print the employee copies. And then if you're somebody who wants to hand the employee copies, you certainly could. Prep for tax. This area inside of QuickBooks is really cool. I think it's underused. So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to highlight a couple of the areas that I think are cool, and just kind of show you what's available. So inside of your toolbox, up inside the accounting toolbox, you can choose prep for tax. Then next, you can actually change your basis. You can also choose your year. And then you have this checklist that's going to walk you through what are all of your year-end tasks. You can even send your engagement letter. You can make sure that all of your end year postings are completed. But you have status just like you do over inside of Books Review. So you're able to go through there and say, did I complete each one of these tasks? The other thing that is available is, I was saying that you have these you can submit and you can send. So you actually have the URLs that you could pop in. So if you wanted to be able to come back later and you wanted to look at the year-end adjustment that you had made, that journal entry, you can actually put a URL hyperlink in order to pull that journal entry quickly. What's nice about this is once you're starting to use the year-end review books, you can actually compare years. So I can see, 2018 is whenever I started using Prep for Tax. And then now whenever I go and I look at other years, I can see all of the activity. And as long as I've uploaded a document or as long as I've put in these URLs, I can link back really quickly to prior years' activities and remember what did I do for this particular client? What are some of the types of adjustments that need to be done annually? So it's kind of just a shortcut to some of those period end and year end activities. I want to make sure, I don't want to forget this, I want to make sure that everyone is aware of the nominations that are open for the top 100 pro advisors. I think it's important for everybody to participate in this top 100. There are a lot of people out here who are doing training for clients. They are talking about, tips and tricks and hacks. So anybody that you feel like needs to be nominated for this top 100, nominations have opened, and you can nominate yourself, you can nominate other people. The important part is to make sure that you go over and before the cutoff date, you just go ahead and submit the nomination. Gary, I want to pass it over to you. I know that I went through a lot today, and so I want to make sure and acknowledge thank you to everybody for your time, and to just remember this is we're gearing up for our year end. So this is part of our preparatory, champion the cause for year end.
All right. Well, thank you, Liz. And on the top 100, I'm going to put that back in the chat just to refresh that, the link. So that'll take you to an article about top 100. And like Liz said, I think it really is important for us to have as many people involved and engaged in this process as possible. We do get feedback, I haven't been in the business that long, or I don't do it because there's a lot of the same people every year. Well, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you don't do it because there's the same people, well, guess what? It's going to be the same people. So it is, if you're not familiar with it, basically there's a 3-step process. We have a call for nominations, and that runs from now until I think it's like February 14th or 12th, somewhere in there. The article and the link that I gave will show you that. I thought I had my video on. I'm talking like I'm on the video. So, but that article, the link in the chat will take you to the article. It kind of gives you a full explanation of the process. But so it's a 3-step process. Nominations, and like Liz said, you can nominate yourself. You can nominate as many people as you would like. And then there's an application process. So once we close the nominations, then we will take a look at all the names nominated, bounce it against the pro advisor list. And if there's any questions, so basically, number one, you have to be a pro advisor. So if you're not a pro advisor, you get kicked out of the list. And then if you make that cut, we'll send you an application. If you've completed the application before, you get the short form. If not, you're going to need to carve out about 45 minutes to do the long form. You only have to do the long form one time, unless you're enjoy that kind of pain, and you can do it every year if you'd like. Most people choose not to. But then the third phase is a voting phase. And we always like to clarify that the vote is not the primary driver in what gets people into the top 100. What really gets people in the top 100 is your certifications, your training, your involvement in the space. And like Liz said, there's a lot of people out there doing a lot of training, a lot of really good training that go unnoticed. And this is an opportunity for us, in conjunction with sponsors, in conjunction with Intuit, to be able to recognize people for the hard work you're doing within your market. So I guess the markets now are really broad, right? They can be across country, across the globe. So it's a great opportunity for some recognition that you may not be able to get otherwise. Liz has been in that list for quite a long time. She's been one of our award winners a couple of times, I believe. And hopefully it's been beneficial for you too, Liz, just as, I don't even know the right term to put, but how has it been beneficial for you? Now it's turned into an interview.
Well, so one thing, I put the PDF inside of chat, but I think that you're the only one who's able to see it. So while I'm talking, I'll maybe
Oh,
leave
yeah,
that
yeah, you gotta,
task with
yeah,
you,
you gotta put it
so
over.
that way, or Betty can see it. I think that part of it is that our personalities as a whole are often, we're not big, hey, look at me. And so there's a bit of oversight that can happen from each of us individuals, because it goes with the type of individuals that we are. We're extroverts, most of us. And I think that there was a little bit of validation whenever I saw my name on that top 100. I think that it's a bit of pride. It's like, oh, I've worked hard for something, and it's being recognized, and it's amongst peers. So I think that our community is close. I think of many of the people that are here as friends. And so whenever I see other, people that I know or people that I don't know, I want to celebrate them. And it gives me a chance to, whenever I see new names on that list, reach out to them and get to know them. It's like, I want to be able to understand what are they doing. So it's also awareness of each other.
Exactly. So great. All right. Well, thanks. Did you go through, I was kind of half listening, half doing some other things while you were running through your presentation, but did you go through any of the questions? There's a question about when you typically send this communication out. It was early on, it's around 2:15.
So I did not get a chance to go through all of the questions. So I'm happy to go through. The handouts are in there, and then Ledger Sync, I'm seeing somebody ask, it's similar to HubDoc, it's going to be a fetching. And then you said, when do I send out? I don't see that one in here, that question.
It was at 2:15 or 2:17. Basically, when do you typically send this communication out? I think it's probably about document collection or your checklist.
Early on. So I wanted to do it like now. And what happens is every single year I create a checklist, and then I want to be able to make sure that I refresh that. So as each year comes along, I'm not starting from scratch, but maybe I think, oh my gosh, I forgot a really important step that I want to add to that checklist. So I throw it back in, and that way my checklist grows as to what I'm looking for from the client, and also what are we reviewing in the books.
Perfect. And then Ledger Sync, I'm just going to put their URL in the chat as well. It's Ledger SYNC .dev.
And then I'm seeing that there's a when is the year-end tasks available? So you can actually go over and as long as you filter into this year, choose this year, then you're going to be able to see the year-end tasks, because part of what you're going to want to do is step number 1 is an engagement letter. So I would recommend doing that now.
Here's one, actually, 2 people said it. This is around 225. My QBO doesn't show setup in books review. I have QBO accountant was one statement. Then the other was, when is setup feature available? I don't have it showing in my client QBO files. So
it should be available for all QuickBooks Online accountant users. If you're not seeing it in a particular set of books, I would recommend going over into another file and looking there. I can also say that if you have completed setup for a client, then the setup isn't going to be available if you've already gone through all of the setup steps, or if QuickBooks Online is recognizing that as a client that you've had for a long time and it's current, you're not always going to see that setup. But if you're brand new to that QuickBooks file, or if you're brand new to that client, you should see the setup.
Okay. And then here's a question. When is the year-end tasks available in prep for taxes?
Now.
Okay.
Yep. So you're able to see it now.
Okay. And then a gazillion questions for the slide deck, which is in there. And then a couple other requests. So again, tomorrow, 24 hours thereabouts, you will receive an email that has a link to the YouTube site, which is where this replay will sit. Usually takes us about 4 days to edit and post it out there. And so probably certainly should be there by Monday. They will also have a link to the slide deck, which will be in a box folder. And I will also include a link to the top 100 article, which about the application process or the nomination process. That will also be in the follow-up. I think that about wraps it up. So certainly hope everyone has a wonderful holiday season. I know that you all need to get a ton of rest between now and especially those who are tax involved. Take a break for the next month if you can. I
We'd
know
love
it's not
to.
possible, but try your best. So, and then I will repost that. Actually, I had somebody say, can you repost the link to the top 100? I'll do that one more time, and then we will get out of here. So I hope, again, Liz, have a great holiday. And
Thank you.
I
You
know
too.
we'll sure we'll talk to you. Certainly we'll email you between now and then, but everybody have a great one, and we will see you in the new year.